Afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to Mark Anthony's Music Picks. Today is episode 121, and for today's episode, I'm going to focus on a relatively obscure techno, ambient, sometimes dub techno label that is run out of the Netherlands, and that label is called Field Records. I tried to look into who is behind Field Records, and I checked I checked on Bandcamp and Discogs and Facebook looking for clues, and I wasn't able to find anything. So I think that whoever is running Field Records or was running it is somebody that's not an actual DJ or producer. I think it's just somebody that decided to become a label boss and wanted to release some music. It's a very interesting label because if you look at some of the aesthetic of the art, it has the same vibe to me as Crow Castle Cuts does. If you're familiar with the Crow Castle Cuts label, a lot of the records just have a color on them. They don't have the label imprinted on them. They don't have the artist, the track names, credits, anything like that. They go for the obscure, simplistic vibe where the information and the producers behind the tracks are somewhat hidden from the buyer. So I think they might have done that to just create a little bit of mystique around the label, and to be honest with you, that does work. It works because it generates a little bit of mystery, a little bit of curiosity, and I think those types of records, if you're in a record shop setting and you just see a plain blue or plain white or plain orange, you're like, what's that? Crow Castle Cuts and Field Records also have similarities because there's a random smattering of artists that are chosen for each of the releases. And that smattering of artists is chosen, curated to basically try to convey a particular vibe that they're going for on that EP. So on a given Crow Castle Cuts record, for example, you might have 5 different artists, but if you tie all of the tracks together on that EP, it's designed to create a cohesive feel. And I think that Field Records also accomplished that very well. Field Records started in 2008, and as far as I know, it's still active. If you look at the catalog, there's, I would say, 3 segments to it. There's the early section, which is from 2008 to about 2013. Then there was a collection or a compilation that was released. I'm gonna cover one of those records, and then after that, they changed the artwork and the feel to something that was less in the plain Jane mystique that I was describing earlier, and became a little bit more creative and brightly colored with things and artist names and track names written on the covers, where as in the beginning you were just almost getting this like white label-ish experience. As far as the vibe of the label goes, to me it's very similar. If you told me that it was somehow funded by or captained by somebody that was involved with the Delscene label, I would entirely believe you. The overall aesthetic of the music is that technological, future thinking kind of techno that's designed for dudes. It's like space nerd dude techno. That's really what they're going for. And if you look back at some of the earliest releases, this episode is going to concentrate on 2008 to 2013. I sort of, there's nothing wrong with the newer releases. I for whatever reason I lost track of them. So there's 10 or 20 in the catalog that I haven't even listened to yet. So while I'm thinking of that, if there's anything from 2014 onward in this label that you guys really love, please recommend down below in the comments, because it's kind of a blind spot for me. All my expertise on this label is in the beginning, the early years. So I have 5 picks for you today, and I'm going to go through them in chronological order, and I hope you enjoy them. The first here is a great example of the artwork concept here. Super minimal. It just says Field. It just says Field, and this is the 05, the number 5 in the catalog. I chose this because it has a really cool track by Multicast Dynamics. It's called Unparalleled Diagnosis. And before, when I was describing that very Delcine technological future atmospheric vibe, I think that track really captures that very well. Multicast Dynamics is an alias of an artist that might be more popularly known as Moleo. Moleo did a really nice release on a dub techno label that was kind of a flash in the pan. It was called Peace Communications, and Moleo did, it's not they, it's Samuel Van Dyck. He did a very nice release that had Inhale and Vacuum on it. That's one that has stayed in my collection. And Moleo also aliases as VC118A, where he goes into his more electro-influenced tracks. And there's a record that he did there called Propulse that has some really dope stuff on it. So if you like Moleo, definitely check that out. And here, Multicast Dynamics, what's interesting about this, Multicast Dynamics did a release on Astral Industries that got really good reviews, and it's one of the ambient records in my catalog that I've definitely hung on to. And I thought it was interesting that under the Multicast Dynamics alias, Samuel Van Dyck went here a little bit more techno, but like I said, for that Delcine timeless classic vibe, you can't go wrong with this. And now moving up to what I consider to be the best record in the entire catalog that I've discovered so far. I'm going to nominate or elect field number 8 for that. And I don't know if you guys can see this. It's kind of got this pukey, pinkish orange. You know what it looks like? It looks like a faded Miami hotel, like where they painted it pink and then 10 hurricanes came through and now it's like almost white. That's kind of the color here. You can see I put a little piece of tape here to denote the side of the record that I wanted to play to make it easier when I was playing it in my sets. Like, you know, some DJs will take like a black marker and put a star. I never write on my records. Fuck that. I'm not destroying my records like that. This tape peels off. Like if I peeled this off, you would never know it was on there. But anyways, the most obvious standout track here is by Artefakt. This was their first track ever, and it is arguably their best track ever. It's called Mirror Society, and when I was trying to curate the sample that I wanted to play for you, I thought, well, you know, this track's 9 or 10 minutes long. It's got a lot of action in it. It changes, especially around the 2/3 to 3/4 mark with the introduction of some really interesting melodic breakdown. But in the end, I decided to actually just play the track from the very beginning for you because I wanted you to see how it progresses. I recently took a stab at production. I bought a machine, MK3, I think it was, and I was trying to produce, and I don't think production's for me, so I'm gonna just leave that alone. That's the 3rd time that I've tried to produce in my life using different software and hardware, and I find it to be overwhelming, frustrating, and somewhat boring. So I don't think production's for me. I think what I'm actually gonna do is stick with this YouTube thing because I enjoy this, I get fulfillment out of it, and it actually brings structure to the way that I listen to records. So one of the things that I do to prepare for my episodes is I'll like live with the records for a week and listen to them 3 or 4 times each so that when I come and do the episode for you guys, I have something meaningful to say about it. But yeah, the beginning of the track here is really it's an example of how to start a track wonderfully and have all the elements kick in at the right time in the right place with this like synchronicity that it's like they were all meant to play together. When I was producing, I always felt like I didn't really know how to start my track. I'm like, well, should I have a kick in the beginning? Should I have an ambient intro? This one, there's just something about that first 2 minutes of this where it just goes totally badass. If you wanted to attribute the sound of Mirror Society to something that already existed beforehand, I would go all the way back to Donato Dazzi's Metal Slave release, which came out in 2005. I found that release to be way ahead of its time. At the time that it came out, there was no competition. Nobody had that tinny, crazy, like acidy sound that Donato did. And it was cool to see Artefakt's a duo, to see Artefakt come out with their first track in 2012 and basically resurrect this old sound and give it like a really nice touch. There might still be, there was a YouTube video for Mirror Society where it was from the first person perspective of a train going down the tracks through snowy landscapes, and I always would watch that video and just sort of like go down the rabbit hole as I was listening to it, because it just has that perfect hypnotic effect. Like if you think of what Luigi Tozzi has been trying to do with the Hypnus label, this is like the absolute perfect execution of that. And another thing I want to say is that I love when artists come out of the gate swinging and just like hit home runs. It's like when a baseball player gets his first at bat in a game and just smokes a fastball into the upper deck. It's like that's what happened here. And it always makes me think that when artists first start their career in the first 2 or 3 years, it's like all of that pent up energy that they had that they were holding back, or maybe they didn't have the ability to release because they didn't have the means to do it. It's like it all comes out at once, and that's why I always find the beginning of an artist catalog to be the most captivating. Now moving up to Field '09, this one's got just a plain old red sticker on it. I was listening through this and I decided to nominate or to choose the track by Crystal Maze. It's called something Cowbell. It's not like Needs More Cowbell, but it's something like that. Really interesting track here. When I was listening to it the first time, I was like, well, yeah, there's definitely a cowbell element in there, and it's catchy and it's cool. But then it dawned on me that this actually is very similar to a somewhat obscure Jeremy Caulfield track called Gravitas. If you listen to Caulfield's Gravitas and this, they both have that sort of peak time rolling tech house vibe to them, but the element that they have most in common is this down pitching synth that kind of creates this very ominous feel, as if you're being like screwed into the earth or spiraled downwards. It can only convey negativity. It's like it's the opposite of uplifting. And I always thought Gravitas was interesting for that, because when Jeremy made Gravitas, it was very obviously designed to like pull you down and like get you down low physically. And that downward spiral feeling can be heard in this. And now that I'm saying this out loud, it really makes me wonder what would happen if I mixed this Crystal Maze track with Gravitas in the same set. I'm sure it would go off. Now I believe we're up to either 2012 or 2013. My next pick is Field 10. Field 10 is really obscure too. Again, this is the kind of thing where if you have record shelves and you're flipping through, you'll go right past this if you don't put a mark on it, because it's just the black generic sleeve with the black label. There's nothing to denote what it is. So until you pull it out of the sleeve and look at the catalog, oh yeah, that's right, it's that crazy Field 10 record. You just blow right by it. On this, I chose the track B1. It's another Artefakt record, and it's called The Other Sun. In this one, again, many flavors mixing together, and being that this was Artefakt's second track ever that I can determine, I feel like not as big of a home run as Mirror Society, but pretty darn close. When I think about the elements that are in this track, I'm reminded of D5's classic flotation tank on Delcine with the big sweeping atmospherics, and the haunted melody of Cryptic's Havaya track that came out a few years ago. Really big, like thumping kick with a dark, spooky melody. And a little bit of, if you remember Abdullah Rashim's tracks that he was releasing in 2013 and 2014, I was reminded of the track Endalasi, where it's just 10 minutes of like almost minimalism and hypnosis and very gentle atmospherics. So this is, again, tying back to that Delcine spin-off theme, something that could very easily, plausibly pass as a Delcine release. But like I said, number 2 easily in the Artefakt catalog of all time. for my last pick for you today, in 2013 and 2014, Field Records released something called their collection sampler. And when I first saw this, I thought the obvious conclusion was that it would be somehow derived from like a double CD. That's what I thought, but there isn't actually a double CD to back this. Maybe there's an MP3 somewhere, or maybe it's just a compilation that they did on vinyl. So there were 3 parts to it, and they switched up the art theme and went with the brown paper sleeve, nice and classy look, and they switched up the aesthetic and labeled some of the tracks on here. Now, as I'm holding this up, you're probably thinking, if you have this record and you know it, you would think, well, I'm probably going to go for that Polar Inertia track on the A1, because actually it's on the B1, because of like how big and dominant it is. But I'm not saying this is a bad track, but if you go through the Polar Inertia catalog, I think there's a couple others that would steal the show from this and still give you that big, heavy, kind of creepy Dozzy vibe. But this one, it's called Sonic Outlaws, is just a slightly, like, I would give it like a B+, whereas some of the other Polar Inertias are like A's and A+. My actual pick, and the one I'm going to give you a sample for here, is the track on the A2. It's by an artist named Remote. Remote is a kind of under the radar artist that I think he has 7 or 8 releases, singles, and maybe an album. Particularly if you're going to look through Remote's back catalog, start with the releases that are on Meanwhile. Those have a lot of reviews, and for good reason. It's always that classy, understated, well-refined, quality-controlled sound that Remote does. And here, the track Echo of You, I think, really steals the show. And that's saying a lot because, like I said, the Polar Inertia is a solid track. And even the A1, the Varg on here, the Varg is a really nice ambient intro. So for Remote to come in and take the win here, you know, it did so amongst great competition. When I think of this track, it's got that silent season Canadian vibe to it, where it's the kind of dub techno-ish vibe that you would want to listen to maybe at 2 or 3 in the morning, where you're just sitting there and you want to listen to a tune, but you're like, man, I'm tired. That's where this Remote track comes in. I love the simplicity of the melody. It's got this soft candy-like feel, and if you listen to the track, that's just very simply constructed. There's a couple of bass lines that change and switch just a little bit as the track moves through, and it just creates a nice, gentle experience. Alright, that's all for this episode, guys. Stay tuned. I'm going to give you a clip from Field 08, my favorite record on this label, and give you a bonus clip of the artist Area 41, somebody that I respect very highly and that I'm going to do an episode for in the future, where he did a very haunted, almost like Goonies, if you remember the 80s movie The Goonies, with all the spooky melodies and the creepy feeling that the movie was trying to create, and the curiosity and the mystique. Everything that Area 41 does in his electro and dub techno tracks comes forward in this track too. So I also wanted to give that track a shout out, and it's one of the reasons that the Field 08 record is, in my opinion, the best in the catalog. To the owner of Field Records, thank you so much for the tunes, and that's all for today. Take care.